Taking a little bit. Sorry about that. Setting it up now. One second. Typically, the video starts playing back, which is kind of a nuisance, but proves that it's there. 1 second.
Sure.
I wonder what's going on there. It says the meeting is private. Let me being live streamed. 1 second. Just gonna check one more thing real quick. I might need to relaunch it.
Mhm.
Hmm. Joe, it's saying the video is private on YouTube. Has that
Hmm.
ever occurred?
No, sir, I don't remember that before. Like you say, it
Ah,
usually.
sorry, Mr. Boonish. So in this case, we are good to go. I had opened up a incognito browser and it needed me to sign into YouTube. So we are live on YouTube now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if we are live, do we want to have Megan do a quick roll call or do we need
Yeah,
a
that would
roll
be perfect.
call?
In this case, we can't. Well, Megan, you have
Hmm?
specifics on what? I mean, I guess you can call the meeting to order. You could take roll call, but there just can't be any official action done. So approval of the minutes, and then we can still review information. I just don't think we can actually take.
Yeah. So we wouldn't be able to approve the meeting minutes of December 5th, and we
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to take any vote.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, I guess Chair Dodwell, I think it might be appropriate to then take the roll.
To take a vote or
No, to take the roll.
take,
So then Megan would. Sorry, I'm just referring to
yeah.
you to then refer to Megan.
Megan, can you take the roll, please?
Yes. Chair Hopper, Vice Chair Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Garitano.
Okie doke. We are not a full quorum, it looks like, but we can discuss what we have here, which pretty much follows suit with what I figured it would.
And in this case, too, Chair Dodwell, Vice Chair Dodwell, I will say that there are no participants here under the public comment section either.
Okay.
So I
Thank you.
suppose we could probably move into the review of the completed project matrices, since we can't approve the minutes at this time.
That's right. So
Let
let's
me
do
go
that.
ahead. Let me share my screen to help have a visual aid here.
I've got it up on my iPad. So
Fantastic. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
yes, we can.
Okay. And to Chair Dodwell, Vice Chair Dodwell, if you don't mind, I can provide a little background on
If
how
you
we
would,
got.
please, sir.
Most definitely. Thank you, Vice Chair. In this case, we created this matrix. Well, I would say the department created this matrix with a lot of help from Councilmember Clark, so we do appreciate that. Just wanted to mention and give kudos where kudos is deserved. In this case, during our last committee meeting, we ranked the criteria 1 through 17, 17 being the most important criteria, and an action item for the department after said meeting was to provide a description of the weights that would be included. So kind of explaining what a 9 would be versus a 0. In this case, that was provided to the committee, and then the committee was tasked with completing their own matrices, and then submitting those back where we've now seen where we have respondent number 1, number 2, and number 3. We did receive 3 responses back. These are the scores, 1 being average because there were the committee member was doing a really cool thing and taking into account some deviation, which makes sense. But we averaged those two scores out, and then we averaged all three of the submitted scores, and that is what we are seeing here. And then we've also
Mhm.
provided a ranking from the highest to the lowest. It's not numerically assigned, but you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., up to 11. What we found here, though, is that per the three submissions, the internet phase 2 scored the highest as on our priority list. And then kind of second, rounding out the third, second, and fourth spot were projects related to watershed erosion. So in this case, I can turn it over to the committee to discuss any questions on these results. But overall, it seems that two of our items that are on our strategic plan, which are internet access and then obviously watershed erosion, both scored very highly. Some of the items that are also on the strategic plans kind of scored a little bit lower, but there are funding options available. So it was interesting to kind of see from the department's perspective how these kind of shook out. But overall, they seem pretty consistent across the board. Thank you.
Yes, they did. So I guess from looking at this, the internet access phase 2 is the highest rated one thus far. And we heard from several council members who are not on this committee that was a major important feature for them. I guess my first question would be, do we have any updated information from Spectrum on what the cost is going to be for phase 2?
Thank you, Ms. Dodwell. Currently, we are still waiting an initial quote for the initial 500 homes. That being said, during the last council meeting, the NDA was approved, which is now going to allow permission, at least for us to be able to get data that we need. I would say the biggest issue right now is that we have, and they are working on getting us a rough quote for I think it's 472 homes that were provided just verbatim from residents reporting it. I think the problem here is I think they're waiting for that. Now that they have it, they're probably working on giving us the full data spectrum, and they don't want to give us a price before they kind of finalize a list, because they don't want us to be able to use that price, I would assume, at least from a business perspective, to then calculate what we'd see in the future. But the plan is now to have them give us something that provides internet data speed for every household, or at least the areas that we've outlined from our side, to see if they truly are affected and underserved.
When have they given you any ETA on when that will be coming back to us?
No. So at this point, they have told me that there is, well, really what was happening here was the NDA was a big point of contention. They wanted to get that over to them. Now that that's with them, is something we do plan to ask them during our biannual meeting next Friday. That being said, not biannual, bi-weekly, but I would say that we should be getting one pretty soon now that we have the NDA.
I would think so, that would be pretty quickly coming forward from them. I just want to make sure that we get it before we end up finished with phase 1 and then they walk for some reason. So we've talked about that before. We also have these watershed activities, and obviously all of these top 4, so to speak, are over what that $100,000 could foreseeably pay for 100%. It would only be a percentage of the overall project on any of these, correct?
Yeah, so I'll let Mr. Vunich speak to the specific retrofit basins project with Cox Creek, and then the Evergreen Forest and Highlands at Wild Horse. But I think, overall, if we wanted to tackle a specific project, I mean, we could probably do a couple for that price, but we're currently looking, I think it was a little bit over $6 million for the whole host of projects that we had at least originally listed out from the engineers. Joe, would you want to add a little bit more info there?
Certainly, Mr. Lee, Ms. Dodwell and Ms. Clark. The Evergreen Forest, Highlands at Wild Horse, we estimated that project when the item came to City Council at just under $900,000. The retrofit of the basins project, That was a priority to the Watershed Erosion Task Force because that was probably the least expensive on a basin by basin basis. And we were thinking each of those could be anywhere from around $50,000 to $100,000, and there were a total of 7. So I think you're correct in your assessment. We can't do multiple projects if we do a single project at its full cost. Thank you.
Mhm. One question I've got is, can we apply these funds towards a project that is already on our uh, strategic plan listing, which would include the here, let me get to a bigger one so I can read it, which would include the retrofit of the basins project and Evergreen Forest. I think both of those were on our strategic plan activities for the coming year, weren't they?
And again, Mr. Lee.
Yeah,
Which-
Joe, you can speak to it, but yes, and I can speak to it briefly here.
Please.
Appreciate that, Joe. And work towards these projects is currently budgeted for in 2024. Right now, the department and the Department of Planning and the Department of Public Works are all looking at the permitting process and getting approvals. Specifically, from MSD, that process is going to be a little cumbersome. And then looking towards a stormwater management master plan as some major priorities and goals of 2024, with actual construction probably not taking place till 2025. Joe, feel free to fill in some blanks there if I missed the beat.
Generally speaking, members of the committee, what the Watershed Erosion Task Force has done is presented you with basically 3 projects. And those 3 projects were just enunciated by Mr. Lee. For the most part, though, we didn't know of the retrofit of the basins. That was something that came a little bit later. We've always identified that the first step that the task force did was identify the 6 priority or critical locations for creek work. And then we've always talked about via Mr. Brown and his input about a stormwater management master plan. The retrofit of the basins was kind of a latecomer to the party, but it was also something that served 2 purposes. It could get a project underway or projects underway, and it was less expensive. And so that's why it's kind of rose to the top of the pile, so to speak.
So that being said, I know we've gone out for grants for several of those particular projects. Have we gone out for any grant applications for the internet access, or we're just moving forward with it?
Ms. Dowell, I can speak to that. Members of the committee, currently the city is looking to apply for BEAD program funding. The federal government has passed a large infrastructure bill that would invest into completing internet projects across the United States, which makes the City of Wildwoods project kind of an attractive piece. The department has already had preliminary meetings with the Department of Internet Infrastructure Broadband Development with the state, and we've already discussed the process, but they do not plan on actually getting applications for that funding live, most likely till March of 2024, with initial awards not being actually given out until most likely fall of 2024 as well. That could fit into our timeline, though, considering we'd most likely structure a secondary contract for phase 2 with funding. With payment being remitted after work being completed. So we probably wouldn't see work for phase 2 being completed by that time. So the money would actually come in probably at an appropriate time. And having a project already on the books could be attractive. Not only that, with allowing this money as well for the internet project, this would also give us some leeway to say, hey, we have a decent amount of matching funds towards it as well. So just kind of giving a couple basics there. But right now we have the ARPA funds around 810,000 based off our estimates with the interest that we should be gaining off the money we have left over. We should have about $810,000 for 2024. And if you take into account BEAD program funding, we could have a fully funded project. That being said, it's going to be up to the council to decide to move forward with the program whether or not the funding comes through.
So from that perspective, if we say we want to use these charter funds or spectrum funds for another spectrum project, is there any conflict of interest with that?
With if we were to use these funds on a internet access project, but then we were able to get additional funding? No, I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I would have to double check and maybe check with the city attorney, but I don't think there would be any issue there, considering even with this is my rough estimate, but I would say even with the internet funds that we got from Charter from the settlement, plus the $810,000 that's estimated after interest income, I still think we're a little shy of what phase 2 is going to cost.
So you're saying that yeah, it's expensive. I don't know. Teresa, what are your thoughts? You've got your hand up.
Well, a couple of thoughts. For one, we considered this in our matrix, in our criteria, and the different funding available. So we had to go with what we know at the time, and because there's things that we just don't know right now, and we have to make a decision with even without that information. So yeah, I think that our numbers reflect that in our evaluation of the matrix. The watershed activity, or you mentioned, I think, Mr. Vonich, you mentioned that the watershed activities are the ones that we talked about are fully budgeted for this next year. Is that what I heard?
No, ma'am. As Mr. Lee mentioned, we have in the 2024 capital improvements program $250,000 for stormwater projects. And that, for the most part, is the estimate to complete the engineering for the 2 projects and get a start on the stormwater management master plan. The following year, I believe we have $1 million set aside for actual construction and completing the plan.
Thank you. Yeah, that I just misunderstood.
I
So
apologize.
no, it wasn't you, I'm sure. A couple of things. First, the internet. When we were talking about that, talking about when are they going to let us know? I would say we need to set our own dates and say, this is when we need to know. And instead of waiting for them to tell us, because we've already had experience with that it pushes back farther and farther and farther on the dates. So we need a plan set up where we say, here's what we expect, and we need to know this by this date so that we can go ahead with our plans, whatever that date is.
I agree, Teresa.
Another thing on the matrix itself, and this just would be for optics for someone looking at it with the numbers on it. I would just, I was talking to you before, Thomas, about Mr. Lee, about the numbers on there, and some of them would be considered outliers within, definitely in a 6 sigma, but even in a 2 sigma deviation from the mean, you would have some outliers, such as the 157 number on the trash rebate, and just making sure that we throw those out if they are outliers in our calculations, because that just doesn't make it fair to the ones who think that's a high priority. And it would just be based on numbers, not based on what I think or anybody else thinks, but just as maybe within 2 deviations from the standard deviations from the mean. And that was what I had to say about that. But the overall numbers that we came up with, I think, tells us what we probably, a lot of people thought the priorities would be of this. I don't think that, in my opinion, taking this money and separating it into 3 or 4 top priority items is the way to go, because it ends up being so little for each one.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not a little amount of money, I understand, but in project size, it's a little smaller. So if we're going to, if we think we can get the BEAD money and we're more sure that we'll get that than we are money for watershed erosion, I think that needs to weigh in, even though we don't have that secured yet. So I think that those 2 top priorities, whether it's, it looks like the top one was the evergreen forest area on our matrix, but
Mhm.
using it for a watershed erosion or for internet needs to be based on how confident we are we're going to get extra funding for one of those programs. That's all I have to say.
Mhm.
All righty.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
no, I made a misstatement. So in 2025, we have $500,000 set aside in the capital improvements 5-year plan. And the reason I said $1 million is, as you know, we're hoping to get that $500,000 from the state legislature that was scheduled for this upcoming fiscal year, but was vetoed by the governor. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I kind of thought that's what you were referring to as
Yeah,
the overall total available.
yes, thank you, ma'am.
Well, I guess at this point, what we really need to do is just take, we've done our statistics, and I say we take back the top 3 priorities and share them with the council at our next council meeting and say, okay, everybody, let's vote on which one does the $100,000 go to. Yes, Teresa.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important, because there are some pretty strong opinions on this, that we approach this in the right way, and just to tell them that we backed off of opinions, and that we
Mhm.
went based on data and
Mhm.
statistics, and we said there's too many different opinions and we just need to back off, and so take all the bias out that we can. I think if we approach it like that, so that everyone understands, we didn't just get in a room and say, oh, well, I think.
No, I think we would, it would behoove us to, I wish we would have gotten feedback from the rest of the members on this committee. I'll send an email out to all of them asking them to send forward their, of course, then if they do that, we may skew everything that we have here tonight. So their time frame for comment is over. And so we'll just have to go with what we have here. Because we gave everybody a due date and a due time, and it's not in yet. So I say we move forward with the top 3 numbers that we've got and share that with the council at the next council meeting and say which one of these, as the committee statistically reviewed this, the watershed, or excuse me, the internet is the top priority. We're going to have some individuals say, well, I told you that already. But at least we have some clear data that we can share with our constituents, etc. And then if we want to get into some disagreements on some things or some discussion, we can look at watershed erosion.
Just a reminder, we don't have a quorum, so we can't make a decision
I know.
tonight.
Yes, Teresa.
So I would like to hear, if it's possible, to hear the different departments from Mr. Vonich and Mr. Brown on what, do you have an opinion on this, on Because there are some very strong feelings, I know, within the residents as well as on behind the dais on what this money should go to. And I know that it's probably going to be some disagreement when we get to council with it. Do you have an opinion from your standpoint? Like, do you feel that the trash rebate is like the number one thing that should be worked on? Or, I value your opinions.
Mr. Brown, if you want to speak first.
Not all at the same time, guys.
I was waiting for Joe to say something.
No, I'm putting you on the spot first.
I mean, I have felt that the internet was certainly a valid project to put this towards personally. It's been a high priority of the city for many, many years. You guys have said as much too in your rankings, so I have no qualms with that. And then secondarily, the watershed, I think, is also a good, I guess I would say I concur with the rankings that you're showing in your matrix. I think that makes sense to me. I'll defer to Joe.
Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, I think at the last meeting of the committee, we started the internet project back in December of 2007, and we formed a group of volunteers from residents in the area that lacked internet. And we spent a lot of time and effort, and City Council was always supportive as we moved into the wireless program and the installation of those tall poles and everything. So I kind of see it as the priority. And I almost look at it, and some others have said this as well, like the electrification of rural areas. You just got to have internet these days. There's just no argument about it. So I land there. Thank you.
And
Thank
city
you.
administration.
Yeah, so looking at this, I mean, I could see, arguments for pretty much all the ones that were listed. That being said, I'm trying to look at this from a standpoint of where are we close at? Right now we are in the middle of a large internet access project. We know what it looks like when, the shovels hit the ground on a project like this. Obviously, it's not going to be a copy and paste effort for a phase 2, but it will be similar in some respect. In a lot of cases, we know that it's not going to be cheap. We know that we currently don't have the funding to back up a phase 2 without an external source coming in. So I do think that, looking at our strategic plan, looking at, what our residents want, which is access to internet, I could see that being a strong item. I do see also, when it comes to the trash rebate program, I do see we had a lot of calls from residents when we made this transition, saying that this was a large increase. So I see where the merits of that argument come from. That being said, with the phase 2 of the internet, I think just with where the project is right now, it's in a pretty decent spot right now to move seamlessly into a phase 2.
Okay. That being said, since we don't have a quorum, we cannot vote on anything. What do we take to council, or do we schedule another meeting of this committee after the first of the year and before our next council meeting so that we can have something that goes to council?
In this case, if I can make a suggestion, Vice Chair Dywell,
Sure.
I think it might be appropriate to, if we want to have something firm go in front of council, to have a meeting sometime in early January, maybe right before. I think that might be the best way to look at it, just so we can have that quorum and have a firm recommendation. Obviously, what I'm kind of envisioning is when we go to council with whatever recommendation the committee comes up with, I think sharing not only the matrix that was used, but also sharing the weights and the explanation of it will be pertinent just to explain, how we kind of developed this, and also showing the first project matrix that was developed and how we added to it. And we added layers of weighting the criteria, kind of explaining that process with documents, but then also having a brief explanation of that during the meeting too, so they know that this wasn't necessarily emotionally based.
No, I think if we take the chart and the methodology instructions and share that as part of whatever we send before council, then that will allow everyone to get on the same page with us. But let's go ahead and schedule a meeting for sometime in January if you want to look at your calendars.
In this case, I can take a look at the calendar after the meeting, Vice Chair, and I can send out some availability for
Okay.
that the first week back in January.
Okay, because we have our council meeting the second Monday in January, obviously, so that only leaves us about a week. Because I'm thinking we're gonna have at least half of this committee gone next week for Christmas and holiday.
I'm assuming the same. I think, yeah, one of the days between the first, second, third, or fourth would have to make.
Yeah, the second, third, or fourth would be fine.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Teresa,
right.
are you in favor with that?
Well, yeah, without voting, yeah, I'm okay with that. But I would ask that, before we meet again, that, if you don't want to do this, that's okay, but when I look at these numbers, you really need to throw out the outliers so that,
Mhm.
it shows a little bit better. And I hope that's not asking too much, but I think it'd be pretty easy to find the standard deviation and just, go to standard on each side of the mean. And
Well,
so that, because the one is, the range is 542 points,
mhm.
and we only have 3 points.
Yeah. I would ask that, Thomas, before we leave on holiday break, that you send out another email and say, at the request of the co-chair, that we get feedback from everybody by the 29th or the 30th of December. So you have it in your inbox. And on the second, you can come in and be able to pull that through your matrices and have a compilation of the numbers. It shouldn't be too tough, should it?
No.
Since you've got your chart already made or
Yeah,
your
if
spreadsheet
I can get
already
the
made.
data in, that would be, I can work with, once I have all the data, I can play quite a few games.
Okay. Teresa, do you still have another question? Your hand's still up.
No, sorry, didn't put my hand down. Just
That's
have my-
okay.
I'm just waving.
I forget about that too. I do too. Well, I guess that concludes our meeting unless we have any other topics that anybody needs to cover.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Said it last night.
then
Happy
You
holidays.
too.
we're not even gonna vote on ending this meeting because we don't have a quorum. So,
Correct, it will just.
everybody enjoy your holiday. It's well deserved, and enjoy time with your family, with your friends. That's special time that only comes every so often. So enjoy what you can get. Take
Thank you,
care,
Pam.
and
You too.
we'll talk to everybody
Thank
New
you.
Year.
Yep.
Okay.